Really a pleasure to be here. And I've been reading the news out of Texas, and it's has sounded completely devastating. So a shout out to all of you and what you've gone through this past week, and also, for what it means for your state and so forth. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here. So I hope to be really practical and very skills based. So I'm going to jump in, and I only have 20 minutes. So I've distilled it down to what has helped me and hopefully helped other people as well. So we're talking about barriers to writing because that's a huge piece in trying to think about academic writing. And as a note, I talked about making writing a habit, which is different from making publishing a habit, because I do firmly believe that writing itself has its own therapeutic value, and it doesn't necessarily all have to lead to publishing. The second thing is, I hope in many of the ideas that I give to you, that you'll find one that resonates with you and that you'll walk away with something that you feel like you could actually enact, something that's personalized. And that includes both strategies and thinking about how you would confront your own barriers. I think usually I like to use the annotation tool, but we've already started on the chat here. I have borrowed from the stages of change model in sort of thinking about where are you right now when you think about your willingness to kind of jump in and put yourself on a different inflection point in terms of making writing a habit. So go ahead and use the chat. You can write one of the stages down in terms of where you are. How are you doing on this journey for making writing a habit in your current career and life? Contemplating, great. Action, regression. I love that somebody put regression. And as you continue to populate the chat with where you are, I kind of toggle back and forth between preparation and action. But the pandemic definitely found me in regression many, many times. And, this is just to say that with everything that is going on and everything that we're all shouldering, this may not be the best time for you to jump on an accelerated course to scholarly writing, that you need to be in a place where you feel like you can manage that with everything else. But I love that I'm seeing something across, essentially across the spectrum. And I don't think I've seen anybody in the pre-contemplation phase, because then I'd wonder, why are you here on your evening listening to this? So thank you so much for continuing to share in the chat. So the first thing I want to do is sort of thinking about those barriers to writing, because this is something that keeps coming back over and over again when I talk about writing, when I do my own writing. And, when you think about writing in the scope of all human civilization, it has really propelled science and religion and government and wars and all sorts sort of things, but it remains universal to human beings in the civilized world that it's hard. I think this quote by Thomas Mann in the top left corner is what resonates with me most, that a writer is somebody for whom it's harder than anybody else. And I don't call myself a writer, and it's already super hard for me. The other quote that I love is from Douglas Adams from The Hitchhiker's Guide. And I have the same feeling about deadlines as they whoosh on by. So good. And I'm so glad that there are others who love some of these quotes as well. I also liken uh, writing to having an emotional albatross around your neck. This is from the Rhyme of the Ancient Mariner. And if I had to call out my albatrosses, first of all, it's my department chair saying, Grace, you have to keep more publishing. And these are real. These are taken straight from my task list. I have a paper I just submitted to the 8th journal in 3 years. I do. I have a paper that has data from 10 years ago that I'm so close to finishing, but I haven't. And I look at the modified date on this Dropbox folder, and basically I put a couple of words in it every month. I have a real albatross around my neck for that one. And then, of course, reviewers and co-authors that may or may not make it easy for you to do the work. Some other barrier is writing and how we feel about writing. I still remember my 6th grade essay writing class, And I enacted those principles in college where I felt like my writing was probably at its peak. I had a little dip up when I was working very hard on my personal statements for medical school and for residency applications. But ever since that, nothing that is clinical documentation counts as writing. And so I think we're all in the same boat in terms of feeling like our writing skills have completely deteriorated. So I'll share 3 tips today. And the first one is how to create a ritual around writing. And I've been really intentional about choosing the word ritual because I don't know, it connotes something elevated, even spiritual, something that's very mindful. And that's different from habit, which, I did put into my title, but habit and routines are a little bit more mundane. For instance, every time I have a bad meeting with my boss, I go get a blueberry scone. That is a routine. That is not a ritual. So, how do we make writing a ritual for our careers? Now, you've probably heard this very commonly is to actually write and create an Outlook invite for your calendar to block time. And I've put an example of what that might look like, but I want you to take a serious moment right now to think about, okay, how much time can I truly commit? Where am I in my space that I can commit? And maybe 30 minutes is too much. Maybe you want to start small with 15 minutes. I have suggested a week because I find that, especially with my writing groups, that when a month goes by, it's really hard to continue the momentum. And the mantra is the more you write, the more you write. So I do strongly suggest per week, but I also challenge you to think about maybe it's every day. And then find a day in the week or a time slot in the week that works best. So if you put together a little mission statement around this, I will spend 30 minutes per week on Tuesday mornings. Mine is I will spend an hour every Wednesday morning and I block it in my calendar. And if you multitaskers want to do that right now, please start and create a recurring appointment for your calendar. The second thing is accountability. I feel so bummed out that it took me years to realize that I cannot write in isolation. That paper I mentioned, the one that's hanging around my neck, I've realized it's because my co-author has completely moved on to a different institution, and I can't count on myself to get started on writing. At the same time, I have a paper I'm working on with 2 very energetic co-authors, and we are going at the fastest pace that I've ever imagined. So accountability and the social construct of writing has so much to do with how much we get done. So my writing hour that I mentioned on Wednesday mornings is with a colleague. In the pre-pandemic era, we would come to my office, we would tell each other, what are you going to work on today? And then we would essentially turn off our phone, email, and then sit silently and type. It's amazing what the awkwardness of sitting in a room with somebody else will do for your motivation. And again, it's become a ritual that I've gotten used to. In the Zoom era, we now do this, we mute ourselves on Zoom and then we type, even though we still have our videos on. So sometimes it doesn't take a lot. I do suggest choosing an introvert. I've tried this with extroverts and it doesn't work so well because you just love to chat instead. But this is something that I might suggest is to choose an accountability partner, just simply to write. Another along the lines of rituals is many of you may have heard of the Pomodoro Timer, which is the idea of intense work for 25 minutes is what it's classically indicated, and then 5 minutes break. Then you essentially rinse and repeat. You may have your own time frames that work best. Some people can do 15 minutes only. I found that I can do 45 minutes of intense writing, but then I need like a good 15-minute break and I can't repeat that. So think about intense work followed by a break, and then essentially the routine of sticking to that. The second of our 3 tips is around getting into the zone. And I hope you've seen the Pixar movie Soul. It's just this wonderful part of the movie where it talks about the main character getting into the zone by playing jazz on the piano. I think we all have times, definitely in play, but also in work, where we completely lose track of time. And a lot of that has to do with creative energy. I mentioned those two colleagues of mine for which we're really on a roll. And identifying what helped me get into the zone has been really helpful. So one thing is I love my co-authors. They're just people I can really relate to. So that's one piece. Secondly is I love the work we're doing. We are doing a qualitative study about diversity and inclusion in our residents. And it's just such a deep and interesting study, which is what makes it easier to write on. I think about some of the work I've done in the past, and it's a chore. It can absolutely be a chore. So capitalizing on that idea of honing your creative energy, I want to talk about the concept of managing your energy and not time. This comes from a Harvard Business Review paper, I think back in the 2007s, and if you Google it, you'll find it. And it's the idea that your time is definitely finite. There's no more than 160 hours a week, but your energy is actually very fluctuating. And sometimes it's very, it's very fickle, but you can harness it and recognize the times in which you've got energy and channel that towards productive things like writing. So I ask you to ask some questions about yourself. And here I continue, suggest that you fill in the chat, and I'm trying to keep track of it as well. Is the first question is to ask, what is your chronotype? Simply stated, are you a morning lark or a midnight owl? I probably don't really wake up until 5 p.m. I mean, all day I'm sort of in a daze. And then when 5 p.m. hits, I'm on a roll. So I do my best writing, sadly, between 10 p.m. and midnight. So think about that and orient your blocked writing times around the times when you are most creative. A version of that is, first thing in the morning when I'm kind of drowsy and so forth. Oh, Andrea, thank you so much for that link to the article. When I'm pretty drowsy, the first thing I'll do is not open my email because I will get sucked into email. Is I sit down, I take a cast over my schedule, and then I'll actually do some writing. And I've managed to make a little bit of my morning time for writing. The second question is to actually ask, like, what do meetings do with your creativity? And by that, I mean, not kind of the humdrum meetings where you're sort of, going through some usual lists, but your creative brainstorming meetings. And that might be with your research colleagues, or it might be with a group of individuals with whom you are doing shared work. If you find that these meetings generate a ton of ideas, that's actually the best time to say, that popular aphorism, we should write this up. And then after you say that, do something about it. Spend some of that time in your meeting to actually crank out an outline for that work. And then, for me, I've been blocking meetings that are 45 minutes long so that I have 15 minutes to build on the creativity that comes from that meeting. So some of you may be drained and really need a break after meetings. I sometimes am filled with ideas that come from other people, and I just want to put them on paper. Another version of this is, if you're the one assigned to do minutes from a meeting, I think we all know if you wait 2 weeks, you will never get around to doing it. And if you do, it will be very, superficial. I find that if I don't do minutes right after a meeting, it will be in and out through my brain. That forgetting curve is quite steep. Another question is, how do you respond to deadlines? As you can see, they kind of whoosh by, and I love that sound. I have unfortunately realized that, on the spectrum of people who do things so they can avoid the stress of procrastination and people who essentially live on the adrenaline that comes with deadlines, that I am in the latter category. And unfortunately, this just means that I know that the energy won't come from me until it's within 24 or 48 hours of a deadline. So manage your time around your own tendencies around how you respond to deadlines. And then lastly, I think it's a concept, but also possibly a misconception that we need to block out hours and hours of time. You may be one of those people that benefits from 8 straight hours of writing. I definitely cannot do that. And so just as I mentioned, I try to spend 15 minutes. I can do snack writing, but I don't do block writing. And so this might alleviate some of the need to carve out an entire day or an entire, weekend trying to find time to write. This relates to great work from, this is from Cal Newport, a book that essentially changed my life, at least for a week, which was about deep work. There's probably no better archetypal form of deep work than writing, and especially academic writing. And what he talks about in his book, among many, many other things that are very helpful, is these different forms, these different modes of deep work, and figuring out what is your tendency. I already mentioned that I'm a snack writer, so the journalistic approach to doing lots of shallow work, going deep briefly, and then toggling back is essentially what I've had to do to survive. Some people write monastically, and they truly, I think a lot of novelists might do this, is go to a mountain and write in a cabin for a long time. So identifying how you do deep work, what's most effective for you, may again help you control your schedule and to manipulate it in a way that allows you to manage your energy. And the other thing is an idea board. So I don't know about you, but I've developed this Pavlovian response to looking at a blank Word document and a blinking cursor. I cannot write in that setting. So what I have is lowered my barriers to writing. I have one of those apps, I think a notes app on, the iPhone, and I use something called Simple Note because literally it's nothing but just text that's unformatted. Some people like, Dropbox and Evernote, but essentially whenever an idea just kind of flits through my head, I write it down somewhere. And, you wouldn't imagine how many drafts of manuscripts are sitting in my notes that never came to a fruition, but some of those actually have. Here's an example. I was having a meeting with some great colleagues of mine, and one of them shared how hard it was for her to speak up in meetings, especially in the virtual environment. The ideas that people generated just in that 10-minute conversation made us think of essentially a 12 tips article for how to promote uh, how to promote gender equity and self-advocacy in virtual meetings. And that became a paper that we submitted. So think about capturing the writable moment. Just like we have teachable moments, you want to capture the writable moment. And then the last few minutes is about confronting, the monster under your bed that is stopping you from writing. And this is where facing the demons that are specific to you may help you get over that barrier. And, I already spoke in the beginning and acknowledged how hard it is to be in this current environment. It is devastating to me to see that women authors in particular and underrepresented faculty are not publishing at the same rates as anybody else, especially during the pandemic. And I worry that scholarly writing will be set back 10 years, 15 years based on, unrepresentation. The other thing is to recognize that in addition to all the external forces that are making it hard, there are negative voices in our own head. So mine is, you're a fraud. The work that you're doing is not worth publishing. You can't do this. Everybody writes better than you. And maybe there are representations of that voice among you as well. And calling them out and realizing that they are illusions might be helpful. There's also this concept of focus thieves. There are external ones, many of which are in your control, just like the fact that I'm completely addicted to this Netflix series right now that I watch every night, 7 days a week. And then there are internal focus thieves that may not be in your control. The anxiety, the procrastination, shame. Shame is such a huge part of a barrier to academic writing. And again, calling it out, shedding light on what is stopping you may be very helpful in getting you started. Inertia, that's something that really is a theme around academic writing. You remember the need for reactants to have an activation energy in order to get over the barrier so that there's a catalytic reaction. Everything that I've talked about so far, focus thieves, external factors, your own negative voices are forms of inertia that can make it hard. You have all of the reactants. You have the ingredients to be great scholarly writers. And figuring out how you get that energy to get over those barriers is what you need in order to make the magic work. And so to bring this all together, this is a four easy steps. Define your finish line in an achievable way. So not, get promoted 2 ranks, but finish that, dang 10-year-old paper. That's mine. Specifically identify what your hurdles are. Think about where you're going to get that energy source. And it might be an accountability partner. It might be committing to a certain block of time each week, each day. And then lastly, figure out what interval that you're able to handle in order to get to the finish line. I'm just going to end with just a statement about why it matters. You don't want to publish just to publish. And this is something I started out with believing as a junior faculty member was I just need to get papers out there. And that's a chore when it's work that you don't believe in. I've now realized that writing, whether it's publication, whether it's a personal narrative, whether it's an op-ed for a lay audience, it's about your voice. It's about sharing your ideas. It's about your cause. And this has helped me realize that this is my way to have an impact outside of my learner group, outside of the people, be transcending my label, whatever label you see of me, and getting my voice out there. So I will end with this inspiring quote from Paul Kalanithi, and it still strikes me to this day that he chose in a situation where he had stage 4 lung cancer to write, and that is his legacy to the world, one that has been a gift to us all. So lastly, I'll just say, just do it, begin anywhere, and I look forward to further engagement later on in the program about this topic.